Hey, welcome to my podcast. My name is Dr. Brendan McCarthy. I am the Chief Medical Officer of Protea Medical Center in Chandler, Arizona, for now. As I've mentioned before, we are moving. Once I know everything, the details, I will share them. I'll let you know it's probably Tempe. So I have to change my catchphrase. I was working on this with my wife. It drives my wife crazy when I do that in Chandler, Arizona. She always teases me about that. And it's going to be in Tempe. So I'm trying to figure out how to make Tempe sound cool. Before we get started on part 2 of this 2-part episode, we're going to be talking about the impact of trauma on the immune system and chronic infections. Please click below, and that's where you will find yourself being able to subscribe, and then we'll get started. So today we're going to go into part 2 of a very complicated subject. And it's complicated because it's several moving parts at once. And complicated doesn't mean impossible. If you think about it, you learn how to do complicated things every day. The steps it takes to get to your car, so you drive to work. Steps it takes to go get to your car, turn on the car, make sure there's gas in it. All the steps you do to run the car, to drive to work, all the acceleration, then slow down, all the things you do, that's a complex process, and you've normalized it. Say you take the bus or the train, all the steps it takes to get from where you are to your train, to pay your way on that bus or the train, to get to your seat, to know when your stop is, the steps that you need to take to get to your place of work, the rights, lefts, and things, and then you know you need to stop here and there. These are all complex tasks. You cook a cake, bake a cake rather, that's complex. Every aspect of things that you do as a human being is complex by nature of who you are. Life is complex. I said this in a previous episode, and I mean it. If I were to go into your life and try and do what you do, if you say you have a job, say you're working at a job, say you're doing marketing or something or advertising, and I just went in there and tried to do your job the first day, I would fail miserably. Say, you're a mom, you're managing a house, you have all these things, I would fail miserably. I would forget everything that's necessary. I wouldn't do any of the steps necessary because I didn't know how to do it. All the complex steps that go into it. Just because you do it every day doesn't make it less complex. It just means you become competent in it. So when I talk about this complex thing that I'm doing, it's not beyond you. Sometimes in medicine, you've been conditioned to believe that what we do is beyond you. That's a defense mechanism on the part of a healthcare provider who is incompetent. Okay? That's a fact. Insecure and incompetent. They're insecure because they want you to perceive them as greater than you. That's common. You know that people in life try and play that power game. And incompetent because they don't know what they're doing, and so they're going to hide behind jargon. What I'm describing to you is complex, multi-part, multifaceted, a lot of moving parts, but you can do it. You can understand it. I want to do my best. I said this at my last episode. I'm going to say it this episode. I want to do my best. I want to be clear more than I want to sound smart. I want to sound understandable. So you guys, your comments in these reels and on YouTube and more on podcasts, we read them. And your feedback means a lot to me. I don't want to do this to make myself seem smart. I don't want to do this to do some weird, whatever. It's not about me. It's about you. So if this doesn't make sense, it gets confusing, respond. Let me know. I want to do better at this. I always do. Always will. So with that said, let's get into the material. The last episode, we discussed, how we can modulate the immune system and optimize the inflammatory response for someone. We can improve their response to stress, through reduction of anxiety, and all those things help a healthy immune system. You think about it. I talked about how, someone gets an infection. First thing we do, antimicrobial approach, fortify their immune system as well, and then replenish what we may have broken down in the immune response that we promoted. Say we use an antibiotic, we want to give them probiotics, right? There's a lot of things we can do to be helpful for that person. What else? We also talked about, the cortisol component with the adrenal complex. If your body's under chronic stress, your immune response is not going to be very robust. Chances are you're going to have more of a strong immune reaction, right? If your cortisol levels are low due to chronic stress, You're not going to have your natural anti-inflammatory. So your immune system is not going to be responding correctly. It's going to be unbalanced, more pro-inflammatory. So in cases like that, sometimes we have to use prednisone or corticosteroid. Now, sometimes a viral infection, bacterial infection, fungal infections is so profound, your immune system is beautiful, no chronic stress, you still need prednisone. There are times you need to use it. But I want to talk specifically about people who have reduced cortisol due to chronic stress. Okay, that's important. So we talked about that last week. Then we talked about how we want to help their cortisol get into balance, how we want to manage their stress and help with their stress in their lives. We talked about how we want to fortify the adrenal gland. I'm going to talk more about therapies today specific to these, by the way. We talked about how your perception of stress is important and how sometimes there's a hormone imbalance, like with progesterone and testosterone, that'll cause that. And those infectious processes can be more robust when you have an irregularity with testosterone and progesterone because you're perceiving stress a little bit more intensely. You know, when you have low testosterone, you perceive things, the fight or flight index, you're more inclined towards flight. You're more inclined to have a strong cortisol reaction. And then over time, that cortisol reaction under chronic stress becomes depleted. And that's going to allow that infection to become stronger. We talked about how people with low progesterone, women who don't ovulate very well, they're low progesterone, they're going to be more leaning towards anxiety. That chronic state of anxiety that they have is going to start depleting cortisol due to chronic stress of that anxiety. And that cortisol level being deficient, these infections now are allowed to be a little bit more inflammatory. So we talked about testosterone and progesterone play a role in it. And then I alluded to it last episode, the role that trauma plays in this and that aspect. Here's the important thing to discuss. 70% of the population will experience a traumatic event in their lives. Of that 70%, 20% will go on to have post-traumatic stress disorder. And at this time, up to 5% of the population at any given time is experiencing PTSD. What is PTSD? This is how I explain PTSD to my patients. Now, if you're a therapist and you hear me saying this and you're saying, dude, if you don't like it, write me a comment, shoot me an email. But this is the one that works. This is the one I've used for years. Picture yourself as a child and you're 5 years old. And every day your mom is going to take you to the bus stop because that's part of your routine. Every day you wake up in the morning and you get ready for school and your mom gets you ready and she walks you out the steps. As you go out down those steps, as you walk down the sidewalk, getting to the bus stop, you are observing everything around you. The way we learn is through constant observation and repetition. So you learn about going down the steps in the morning. You learn about holding your mom's hand. You learn about holding on the rail as you walk down. You learn that you make a right at the sidewalk. You learn that you walk down the street and there's this traffic light. You learn at that traffic light, cars are going by all the time. And every day you see the cars go by, and every day you walk, every time you see something, you create little imprints in your mind of these moments. And you create patterns in your mind of understanding that this is how you get to the bus stop. This is some days you need an umbrella, some days you need a coat. You create more of these patterns in your mind. You know that you get to this intersection, you have to wait for the walk light to turn green. Not just the traffic light, but the walk sign needs to turn green too. And when you walk across the street, you have to stay in the crosswalks. You know that sometimes cars will go fast when they see a yellow light. You know, sometimes cars will make a left during a yellow light when all the other cars are stopped. And you constantly observe this and you make little packets. And that's how you learn how to go to school and get to your bus stop. Now, say one day you're walking and you're going to your bus stop and you're at that traffic intersection, you're across with your mom. And a car doesn't run a yellow light, it runs a red light. And when it runs that red light, another car hits it. Say that car intersection, that accident that happened in front of you was traumatic. Say you saw someone get hurt. Maybe they weren't wearing a seatbelt and they came out of the car. I'm sorry to be graphic, but this is important to discuss this. This is a key thing here. You're seeing this traumatic event occur in front of you. Maybe there was a fire. Maybe you heard people. Or it could have just been the bang of it. That was a unique experience. That was more than you were ready for. And say you're 5 years old. You don't know how to encapsulate it. You keep going, you cross the street, your mom, you look, you do the whole thing, but you basically get on that bus at some point and you go to school. The next day you do the same thing. You go to school. But now you have this one memory in your mind that wasn't fully processed yet. You were too young. It was too traumatic. No one talked about it. You didn't know how to make it into those little packets of thoughts that, oh, this is a sunny day today. It's going to be hot. I shouldn't wear my winter jacket. Or, hey, it's going to be a rain day. I should wear my winter coat. It's not a simple packet like that. It's a traumatic thing that happened where you saw something and it has in your mind this fear. And it was a horrible experience. Every day you go to school and get on the bus, you're doing that pathway again and again and again. And then you get older and you no longer take the bus and say now you're driving to school. And now you're as an adult driving and all of a sudden you don't know why. You get anxious at a yellow light about to turn red. You avoid maybe driving sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to get in the type of car. You hate that type of car that you saw get in the accident. There's a lot of ways that the brain tries to protect you from remembering that traumatic event. One of the ways is you try and reroute your life. So you'll see people avoiding, again, driving, period. You'll see people not drive at all because they have a traumatic memory around driving and they avoid that memory. So they avoid anything having to do with it. Sometimes they yell at other drivers because they have that memory of someone driving poorly. So they get angry at other drivers and anxious and upset at drivers. It's all because there's an unprocessed aspect of their brain. That memory is not fully integrated in a healthy, natural way. So when as you go looking for pattern recognition for where you are and you come close to that traumatic event in your memory, as you come close to it, you want to avoid it or you want to fight it or you definitely do not want to experience it again. So you do everything to stay away from it. PTSD is when you're constantly being triggered about this. Now, some people can go their whole life with this weird memory of something bad happened and they're fine. They'll make it all the way through life and it'll never be an issue. Sometimes, though, it's enough to impede your way of going through your normal life. Like you can't drive. I'm not going to get in a car ever again, or you're a road rage person or any number of different ways. You won't cross the street. We have all things. And when it gets to be that much, you have to face that trauma because you can't get through the day. You can't live a normal life because this trauma is getting in the way of you living a normal life. Sometimes when we come to that place, we go to a doctor and they'll prescribe us an SSRI or anti-anxiety agent or an antidepressant medicine. Mostly it's antidepressants these days. And that'll help modulate your response to it or dumb it down or numb it a little bit. But it's still here. It doesn't go away from taking a medication. Some people want to do everything they can to avoid that memory so they don't want to go into therapy and talk about this traumatic event, this experience that happened to them. They don't want to face it. It is hard to face that. Sometimes a family member took advantage of our body. Sometimes we were physically hurt. Sometimes our parents didn't love us because they didn't know how to. And we were raised without knowing what it meant to be loved or wanted. Sometimes we were ashamed. There's so many different things that happen to us. And those traumas would be in that deep memory and those pathways. And it's difficult to have healthy relationships when you have these traumas. It's difficult to have a normal relationship when you have these things happen to you. But they're so painful that we'd rather look at anything else and do any other therapy. Sometimes we'll go to therapists and we won't talk about it ever. And we just take our antidepressants. Sometimes we don't even do that. Sometimes, see people get, involved in, substance abuse because that's a great way they think to numb it, to not feel it. Sometimes we create these personas that we aren't to protect us from these events so that we never have to experience that. So you see a boy who was traumatized as a child turn into this big, muscly, building guy. We all have different ways to avoid it. So post-traumatic stress disorders, you've had a trauma happen in your life, and now it's causing you stress later in your life, and you're not able to navigate a normal life because of it. So what are some common PTSD risk factors? Domestic or intimate partner violence, rape or sexual abuse, physical assault, mugging, carjacking, random acts of violence, things that happen in schools, workplaces, children, as I mentioned a minute ago, being neglected, emotionally, physically, sexually abused, harmed. That's the risks, the most common risk factors for PTSD. There's more, but those are the basic ones. The risk of developing, like with rape, 49% of people who've been raped who have a risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And severe beating or physical violence is about 31.9%. Sexual assault, general sexual assault is 23.7%. Serious accident or injury, that's about 16.8%. Shooting, stabbing, 15.4%. Sudden death of a family member is 14.3%. If you have a child with a life-threatening illness, 10%. Witness to a killing or serious injury, 7.3%. And if you experience a natural disaster, live through one, 3.8%. And that's just the percentages of the population. But if you're that one person in the percentage, it doesn't matter. I hate using percentages. I don't know why I just did that section. I guess I just wanted you to know that these are all things that are common to it and known to it and studied around it. But I hate using percentages because if you're that one person, it's like 3.8% of natural disaster people experience it have post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm one of those 3.8%. Why am I weird? Why am I the one that has it? That's a whole nother reel, by the way. That's a whole nother episode. I will do an episode on why some of us, because there's an endocrine component of why some of us develop post-traumatic stress disorder. That is not part 3 of this, but it is the next section I want to go into a little bit. So those are the most common things. That's some of the studies around them. The symptoms you would see. Symptoms you see around post-traumatic stress disorder would be like intrusive thoughts. Just thoughts that come in your brain and you can't stop them. You can't pull them back out. And what's funny is that if you have PTSD, you don't recognize them as intrusive thoughts. You just recognize them as your normal internal dialogue. Say you had something happen to you. Say your mom, was cruel to you as a child. You'll have intrusive thoughts being like, man, I fucking hate my parents. I hate my mom. Or you'll have, intrusive thoughts about I'm not good. I'm a loser. Those are intrusive thoughts, by the way, if you didn't know that. Whenever you think random thoughts that are not necessarily healthy, and it's not healthy, right? We just get used to it, so we think it's normal. But if we step back for a moment, take some peace, it's not healthy. Those are intrusive thoughts. Sometimes you can have, intrusive thoughts can become memories of the experience you had, intrusive thoughts specifically about the event. It doesn't have to be like, I hate my mom or things like that. It could be like you have an intrusive thought remembering an event and it'll come when you don't want it to happen. And you're trying to get through your life and it's like, why did this bubble up out of nowhere? It's like bubbling up out of a tar pit. This memory, you can't stop it. That's intrusive thoughts as well, intrusive memories in that case. Avoidance. And that's when we avoid events, or avoid situations, avoid anything that may have to do with or remembering that traumatic event. As I mentioned earlier, the car person is just like, I'm not going to get a car again. I have patients that would never get on the highway again. I've had patients have so much anxiety they would never get on an airplane again because there was turbulence on a flight once and they would never get on a plane again. And that's that avoidance component. And we want to avoid things that may have some memory to it or some association with it. Another one is your memory changes around the event. You have your ability to consolidate memories around that event are not clear and not healthy. That's a defense mechanism. We try and protect ourselves. I want to say this to you now. This is a fact. You cannot delete memories. It just won't work. It's always there. You always have the memory. They degrade over time, but you still have the memory. You still know something happened. Your ability to forget them is a lot of ways your brain kind of during twists and turns on itself so that you don't have to remember it. Just trying to avoid that memory the best that you can. And sometimes your cognitive impression around it also, you'll create new memories around it or bolster up aspects of the event that makes you feel safer. Sometimes that happens too. or you'll bolster up sections of it that make you feel even worse. That'll happen too. So any kind of memory irregularities associated with the event around that concept would be an issue as well. Another one that's important to talk about is the arousal effect. Like some of us become hyper responsive and hypersensitive. Like you'll have people saying that there's a person that they believe is a child abuse person who's abusing children. And you'll have that person going out with a gun to go get them and shoot them. And where this gets weird, this is important, we know this, it's part of being a human being to find the person who harms a child to be abhorrent, to be bad. It's a natural human response to want to get them done, bad, get rid of them, stop them. It's an immediate response that's natural and healthy. We live in a society of laws that we need to prove guilt and innocence, because there are times when people have been accused and it wasn't them, it was someone else. So part of being a human being is being like, I want to stop this. This should not stop, should not continue. But also part of rational mind saying like, well, we need to know all the facts, but we need to make sure we stop this from possibly happening. If this person's possibly doing it, we need to stop them. We need to hold them. We need to find out everything around it, investigate it. That's a healthy response, to be curious about what the heck is happening there. When we have alterations in our arousal and our reactivity, we're the judge, jury, and executioner. And that's when you see people doing crazy things, like they'll show up with a rifle at a restaurant because they think that it's a place that's doing harm, or you see someone hyper responding to things that they don't know everything about yet. It has to do with their own trauma within. It's like the person who just starts yelling at you because you did something wrong. When people are actively experiencing PTSD, it is common for chronic viral infections to come back. And that would be someone like herpes simplex virus. You see that becoming more active when their PTSD is occurring. That's been proven in literature. It is common to see dormant infections become active during PTSD. We know that PTSD is a common reactivator of chronic viral infections, such as herpes simplex virus. People with PTSD in the literature, and they've done a lot of studies with veterans, have immune dysregulation. When you have chronic PTSD, you have the highest incidences of immune dysregulation. Your immune system is not modulated very well in these moments. And that goes back to the whole adrenal complex we spoke about earlier in the last episode. People with complex PTSD, their cortisol responses are inappropriate to the stresses that they're experiencing, the PTSD they're under, because it's chronic and it's basically breaking down their immune system and making it weaker and weaker. They have blunted responses. And when they get sick, they get real sick. Their immune system is not intact. It's not healthy. So when a patient presents to my clinic and they have a case of Lyme that won't go away, or they have a chronic viral infection or a chronic fungal infection and it won't clear, I always go down the first route of their adrenal complex. How is their adrenal complex? How are they with stress in their lives? How are they? Do I need to give them prednisone to suppress their immune system because it's becoming too robust of a reaction? Is their cortisol levels low because of chronic stress? Do I need to address that pathway? Is that pathway compromised because of a testosterone deficiency in a woman or man, or progesterone deficiency, mostly in women? Is that a complex in there that I can treat that? That usually is enough for most cases. But what about the real complex ones that continue on? Those ones we always want to look to post-traumatic stress disorder. As I mentioned, this is not something you want to touch. Most people don't want to talk about what happened to them. Most people don't realize that these traits they have in their lives are actually PTSD. They just think that's their personality. You want to avoid it and you don't want to address it. And it's hard to sit down with someone because, think about this, just bear with me. This is important. I don't want to be We're doing this again. If you've been traumatized and you're a child and things were done, you're the victim. And there's nothing you could have done. And now you're an adult and you're stuck with the luggage of unpacking it and figuring it out. You're still the victim. It's not your fault. And you have to unpack it in a world that doesn't fully understand how to unpack it. And you have to figure out how to cure it in a world that doesn't quite understand how to cure it yet. I'm going to give you therapies. I promise you. I'm not leaving you high and dry. This is a long episode. I know. Be with me right now. This is important. There's a part of you that is enraged for what's been happening to you, rightfully. So when you go to your doctor and they sit down with you and they say, this infection, this process, this lack of healing that you have is because you have PTSD and you're not over the trauma that happened to you. And it's you. In a way, you'll feel like you're being blamed for this infection now too, that this is being thrown on you too. And it's almost like that's being perpetrated on you as well. I know how that is perceived. I'm so aware of that. And I don't want you to feel further persecuted by me saying to you that the trauma that happened to you is what's causing your immune system to be dysregulated and allowing you to have a chronic infection. Because it seems like I'm blaming you. And I am doing not at all. That's not it at all. I want to point out what could be doing this. And I want to do that because I'm here to help. Diagnosing someone means to understand them and understanding that person, know that person. So when you have a chronic infection and there's PTSD, I want to know that. I'm your doctor. This is what we do. It's not to blame. It's to know. And by us knowing it together and opening up to the light of day and honestly acknowledging it, we are more empowered together to cure it. How do you cure PTSD? How do you mend a broken heart? There's a brilliant podcast called Adaptable Behavior Explained. That's one that I like. I know Kelly O'Horo. I've known her forever, since she started practicing, and I think very highly of her. That's a good place to look at. But I'm going to tell you in a short little hack here how we treat it in my practice. We refer to EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is a type of therapy that has the highest rate of success that I've seen in the literature and that I've seen clinically myself with my patients in my practice. I don't prescribe to cognitive behavioral therapy because I have not seen it work as well. This is my experience as a physician. And I'm telling you what I refer to based upon my observations as a physician and the feedback from my patients. So I refer to EMDR on the regular. EMDR is the best approach. Now, if you do not have access to an EMDR therapist and you only have cognitive behavioral therapy, do that then. Some of my patients don't have access to any of those things. There are churches, and I know there are churches in my area that have therapists that do this as well. I know there are therapists that do EMDR at our churches as well. So there's faith-based therapies as well that can be helpful. What I'm trying to say is there are ways to do this. And sometimes when we want to avoid it, we'll give every excuse not to. And I know that too. Sometimes you have to get to the point where you're under your rope and you're like, it's like you want to live. And you're worth it. You're worth curing this. I have seen EMDR cure people from complex PTSD. I have seen it up close and personal. I know it works. What other things do I do? What are the fancy things I do as a doctor? When I look at the adrenal gland, say they're complex, their adrenals are low, their cortisol is low and they have a viral infection, I'm going to give them enough cortisol to get to the normal range. So I'm going to use sometimes Cortef, which is a prescriptive agent. I'll use that to bring that up if necessary. Sometimes I'll use adrenal support protocols. There's certain nutrients I can use that help support the adrenal complex. It really is going to be based upon lab work. And I need to be careful when I use cortisol. Say I use too high of a dose, I'm going to suppress the natural immune system. I'm going to be suppressive of the immune system, and it's not going to benefit the patient in front of me. So I need to make sure I'm using my labs and monitoring and doing it right. Sometimes I need to use prednisone to calm down of a cytokine storm. And that's something I do as well. And then when they're done with prednisone, I need to make sure I'm giving them enough cortisol to help their body regenerate and make enough cortisol naturally themselves. So that's important. So that's my adrenal approach. I also go after sleep lifestyle. We use heart rate variability. I use the Oura Ring. People do the Whoop watch. There's different ways of monitoring your heart rate variability, but you can see how your body responds to stress in real time with these tools. They're available now. They're still a little pricey, I believe. They should be less pricey, but they are a very distinct, useful tool in clinic for monitoring and managing stress with patients. I'm a big fan of it. Pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the direct precursor to progesterone. So if I'm presenting with a woman who has a history of low progesterone, PMS symptoms, she has a viral infection that's not really clearing very well, there's an adrenal component that's associated with a history of long stress, I'm going to look at her progesterone. If her progesterone has been low, as I mentioned, I'm going to give her progesterone, but also pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the direct precursor to progesterone and allopregnenolone. So by giving them pregnenolone, that also will help. I run lab work to verify it's needed, and then I treat. Pregnenolone is an over-the-counter supplement in the States. I use anything from 30 to 90 milligrams, generally at night before bed because it helps you sleep. So I'll use that as well. That'll help modulate their anxiety and the response to stress, which will help their immune system as well. Progesterone for women, we'll do 50 to 200 milligrams if they're menstruating, 50 to 200 milligrams the last 10 days of their cycle based upon lab work. If it's very low, I'll do 200. So I've done up 300, even 400 milligrams. In the literature, you go up to 600 milligrams, but a lot of times I don't need to go that high so long as I'm using a sublingual dissolving troche. You have the best absorption doing that. If you don't have access to that, use the pill, but always we want to run labs to make sure we're getting enough because that will help modulate your stress. If you can get that progesterone firing correctly through lifestyle, that's key. There's a lot of other therapies. I've done podcast episodes on it, but let me quickly say progesterone therapy is a key part with women as well. If you're menopausal, we do it all month long. Testosterone, that's going to be tricky with women. With women, we run labs to verify that's what's necessary. We look at your free testosterone. And if it's low, we bring it up. My goal is to bring it between 2.0 and 4.9 on your labs. We use 10 to 25 milligrams injectable of testosterone cypionate every 7 days, depending on your response. We run labs within a month, 4 days after an injection, to verify I'm in the range for your free testosterone between 2 and say 4.9. No higher than that. You want to be below that for sure for side effects. Testosterone replacement therapy in men, we run labs and then we'll do injectable testosterone with the men as well. And I'll do anywhere from 100 to 200 milligrams every 7 days based upon their labs and how their body responds. So if a man is low in testosterone, his chances of having a dysregulated response to stress affecting his immune system is higher. By normalizing testosterone, you'll have better response. What else? Thymosin alpha-1. That's a mouthful. That was once known as Zodexin. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's once known as Zodexin, and that's a prescriptive agent. It no longer is a branded medication. It's now considered an orphan drug, or I believe it's available generic. This medication is very specific to the immune system. Now, the way your immune system is modulated by cortisol and deficiencies in cortisol, say your cortisol is very low, thymosin alpha-1 can play a really important role to promote a healthy immune function. That is something I prescribe on a case-by-case basis because that can be very helpful. It improves your immune response. It promotes T-cell differentiation, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times we just want to do that. We do 1.5 milligrams every 3 days with our patients. We do that based upon their immune response and their base of what their body needs. That's more specific to immune stimulation when someone has, chronic stress and we want to bolster the immune system. And as I mentioned, for PTSD, we refer to therapy. I hope you felt heard. I hope you know how important you are. I know you felt neglected. I know you felt like your health has just been ignored and forgotten about. And I hope this helps. I hope this helps you move in a direction that can help you find a solution. I've seen miracles. I've seen patients get on the other side of these. I know this can work. Again, this work means so much to Justin and myself. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your comments really help drive this podcast. We'll be doing another episode soon on trauma and continuing this. Until then, I'll see you at the next episode.